Anyways, I hope that you're having a good start to your Sunday morning. I'm guessing for the majority of you here, your Saturday evening was a pretty good one, with the 49ers beating the NFC number one seeded Green Bay Packers. What a game that was, and I watched it all. And not only that, I'm not necessarily a 49er fan, and if I'm a football fan, not only that, but I ended up watching a good deal of the Cincinnati Bengals and Tennessee Titans game, because that was a good game. And all of those hours should have been spent working on my sermon. So if my message falls a little flat today, you can blame it on football. This time of year is always hard for me to focus, especially when they have multiple games on Saturday. And so with that caveat, and before I get into my message, I do want to highlight our upcoming schedule. As I mentioned in the past, there are certain dates when SASF is not available for us to meet, but that those dates were subject to change, and they have changed. As you can see, the number of dates that these facilities are not available has actually gone down. We no longer have to find an alternative location on March 13. It's now available. I think we've also picked up another Sunday in April. So now there are only 4 dates between now and the end of July for which we're going to have to make plans for an alternate location to meet. And we've also secured this location through the end of the year, and I think that there's only a couple of dates between August and December when these facilities aren't available to us. So except for just a handful of times, this is our place of meeting for the rest of the year. Okay, that's my only announcement that I have for this week. Before I transition into my message, let me open us up with a word of prayer. Father, we come and gather here each Sunday to hear a word from you, to be together in, not just physically, but in our spirits, Lord, to lift up our hearts and to be able to commune with you at this time. So we pray that your Spirit would come and touch each person wherever they're at, Lord, and that you would bless and anoint this time. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so today I'm going to have us look at an event in Jesus' life that took place early in the Gospel of John. It's actually considered to be the very first miracle that Jesus performed. As I mentioned last week, John doesn't devote much of his gospel to the circumstances surrounding Jesus' birth at all. He begins by describing Jesus' incarnation, or becoming a human being, with the use of symbolisms like light penetrating into darkness, and the Greeks' understanding of the term logos, this force that's believed to be behind the ordering of the entire universe, as that which became embodied in Christ. But after spending just a dozen or so verses describing in his own way the extraordinariness of Jesus' birth, John jumps right into the beginning of Jesus' ministry and the work of John the Baptist. And already by the beginning of chapter 2, Jesus has already recruited his first disciples, and he's currently in the city of Cana when the following event occurs. So here's what it reads, beginning with verse 1. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and the disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, although the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. When I think of Jesus' miracles, I usually think of him helping those who are in desperate need, feeding the hungry, healing the blind and the lame, delivering the demon-possessed, or even raising people from the dead. These are the types of things that account for most of Jesus' miracles that are written about throughout the Gospels. They are acts that relieve suffering or desperate need, or restore wholeness and health. So it's a little surprising to me that the first miracle in Jesus' ministry, according to the Gospel of John, is one that almost seems a little bit frivolous. There's no desperate need here. There's no life-threatening situation. There's no crisis of hunger or illness. So it seems a little bit odd, or at least interesting, that this is the way that Jesus officially launches his ministry. And that's not the only question that came to my mind as I read this account and I thought about the details. I actually have quite a few questions, to be honest. Some, I believe I was able to come to some resolution on, but there are others that still remain somewhat of a mystery to me. The first thing that struck me about this story is the simple fact that Jesus was even at this wedding. Not that I didn't think that Jesus went to weddings, but because of the nature of weddings in first century Israel, it makes it kind of difficult for me to imagine or place him in that context. You see, weddings in first century Israel were often full-on blowout celebrations. Parties that involved food, drink, and festivities that took place over the course of at least several days. We know that in the Old Testament, in Judges chapter 14, that when Samson got married, the feast and celebration following his marriage lasted a full 7 days. And the text says that this was customary for the Jews at that time. Now, by the time of the New Testament, scholars say that the length of the celebration may have shortened to less than a week, but that there were still weddings that observed the customary celebration that lasted an entire week. We don't know how long this wedding in Cana lasted, but it was at least several days. We do know that during the celebration, it was customary to eat and drink and dance and drink and eat and party. And did I say drink? Enough so that I'm certain that there were at least quite a few people that were slightly inebriated, if not more. And that's the image for me that's a little bit hard for me to put Jesus into. But apparently he was there. And for the duration of it, or at least until the point in time when the celebration ran out of wine, which I'm guessing didn't happen right away. You see, I've been to a lot of weddings, probably more than most of you. I've attended quite a few, and I've officiated over probably even more. At most weddings, even the ones where I'm invited to attend and I'm not officiating, I tend to leave before the reception formally ends. Do you find that to be true for you as well? Sometimes I will leave a little earlier than others, but the time that we or I generally take as our cue to leave is when? Nope. It's when the dancing starts. right? When the lights go out, when the music starts to blare, and the party goes to another level, or at least it's supposed to go to another level, but most weddings I have attended, the dancing never really takes off. But that's the time when we tend to leave for more than one reason. One of which is, I don't really know how to dance that well. And if I did go out there, I'd probably look like John Travolta from the 70s, and nobody wants to see that. Jewish weddings are different than the typical weddings most of us have attended. They're much more festive and raucous than the weddings and the receptions that we are used to, and they have been that way throughout their history. And so something that I know that I have to always be willing to learn more about and be willing to adjust my perception of is my understanding and image of Jesus that has been shaped by my particular cultural and religious sensibilities. Jesus attended this wedding and almost certainly took part in its festivities that took place over the course of at least several days, and that involved eating and drinking and dancing. And so what does that mean to our image of Jesus? I found this toy statue of Jesus on the internet the other day that's called Dancing with Jesus. How does this image of Jesus make you feel? Can you imagine Jesus taking part in a conga line dance? There's this video series that came out not too long ago. It's still ongoing, called The Chosen. Have any of you seen it, heard about it, aware of it? It's a series that's on the life of Jesus. It's actually the first series that's ever been produced on the life of Jesus, and it attempts to portray Jesus as he would have likely been seen and experienced in the context of his time and culture. One episode from the show has the scene from the wedding at Cana. And in that episode, you have Jesus dancing there in the blue tunic. And that's Peter to his left, and then I think next to Peter, on Peter's left, is Andrew. The show's creator consulted with notable church historians and New Testament scholars and is attempting to present a fresh look at Jesus based on more current scholarship from hopefully a more objective vantage point than the Jesus that many of us grew up with in church. I've only watched a couple of the episodes, but the episode with the one that has the wedding at Cana has Jesus dancing and singing and joining in with the festivities. And as I watched it, there was just something about that both challenged and resonated with the Jesus that I'm coming to know as I progress in my faith. There is a reason that the Jewish religious leaders in opposition to Jesus often accused him of spending time with drunkards and sinners. And so I'm guessing that he was in this kind of an environment more often than we probably tend to think. In the wedding at Cana, when things get really interesting, is when the wedding celebration runs out of wine, which Jesus' mother, Mary, becomes aware of and is very concerned about. Now, as I thought about this aspect of the story, I find that I really resonate with this. I don't know if you're like me, but if I host a party, it's a really big deal that we do not run out of food. If I am hosting a party, then the odds are that I overestimate the amount of food needed, and it won't even be close. If there are 20 people coming, you can bet that I will end up ordering enough for 50. And it's not that I know that I'm over-ordering. It's that I think I'm just being safe, given all of the variables, from the size of the portions, to the age and the gender of the people that are coming, to the time that the meal's being served. In my mind, I'm just adding a little extra to be safe. But it winds up being about 2 to 3 times as much food that we need. For me, big deal. For some people, you may not put as much importance on it. In the Jewish culture of the first century, I would have fit right in because it was a big deal. Jewish culture placed supreme importance upon hospitality, so much so that if you planned a party and did not provide enough food and wine for the guests, it would actually be seen as a blight on your character. Now, here in our time and culture, it's probably not seen that way by most everyone. But in the first century world of Jesus' day, to not provide enough for your guests is not just a minor faux pas on the part of the host. It was something that could taint your reputation in the community, as hard as that might be for us to understand. It was that big of a deal. Now, Jesus' mother is somehow invested in this. Archaeologists aren't sure, but it's believed that the city of Cana was probably about 5 to 10 miles just north of the city of Nazareth in first century Israel. So there's a good chance that the host of this wedding involved people that Jesus' family likely knew. For Mary to take a vested interest in the potential scandal of this situation seems to point to the idea that she likely had some kind of relationship to the family hosting this wedding. So she brings this matter to Jesus, and then this really curious exchange takes place between them. Jesus' response to her seems to be somewhat blunt and cold. At least on the surface, it does, to me. He says to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." Now, in our culture, if you turn to an adult female and say, "Woman," I do not think that's going to go over very well. But scholars say that in the first century Jewish culture of that day, the term that Jesus used is actually a term of respect. It would be like using the term ma'am. But they're also quick to point out that it is a somewhat formal term that seems to put some distance between Jesus and his mother. It would appear to me that in this moment, Jesus is letting his mother know that, like the people of Nazareth that we looked at last week, who were expecting that Jesus would treat them with favoritism because they were his hometown people and he was their boy, Jesus likewise seems to be letting his mother know that she should not insist on or presume that her relationship with him could be used as leverage to get him to do something. But having said that, he obliges her request nonetheless. Because on the surface, it appears to me that Jesus was not intending to remedy this situation of his own accord until his mother comes to him with this request. And Jesus' comment that my hour has not yet come demonstrates that he knows that the moment he begins to reveal his identity is the moment that the countdown to his crucifixion begins. And maybe he's not certain that that time has yet come. But in this moment, it seems to me, Mary had an impact on his decision.
For the frogs this time.
Not yet. I'm going to show you the scene from the series The Chosen. You can go ahead and turn out the lights. It's the episode with the one that has the wedding at Cana. The show's creator has chosen to depict this exchange between Jesus and his mother as one that's tender, where Mary appeals to her son, not from a place of demanding or expecting, but it's an appeal that comes from a warm and from an intimate place between a mother and her son. And again, the scene is dark, so I hope you can see it. Jesus is with Peter and Andrew in kind of this walkway between two buildings when they're approached by Mary.
For the frogs this time. Oh, sons of
We were
Jonah!
just looking for you. Dancing to the song of Miriam, and we thought you wouldn't want to miss it.
Of course. Let's the three of us show him how it's done, huh?
I don't think that's such a good idea.
Why?
Andrew has 4 left feet.
4. Why 4?
When he tries to dance, he looks like a donkey walking on hot coals.
Oh, Andrew, do you deny it?
I've never seen a donkey walking on hot coals. Actually, that would be a terrible thing to behold.
My son,
Ah, Andrew, you see, even my own mother will join us in the Song of Miriam.
they've run out of wine.
But it's only the first day.
Yes, and it's all gone. Not a drop left.
Why are you telling me this?
We can't let the celebration end like this. And the Etcher's family humiliated.
Boys, go join the others. I'll be right there. Mother, my time has not yet come.
If not now, when? Please. Do whatever he tells you.
I don't know if that's the way the conversation between Jesus and Mary went, but it seems apparent to me that Mary's appeal to Jesus impacted him. Because despite his initial objection, he responds to her request. And he has the servants fill with water these 6 stone jars, large stone jars. Now, these jars were normally reserved to hold the water which the guests would use in order to wash their hands. Because in Jewish thought, during the course of the day, individuals would become ceremonially defiled. And therefore, before sitting down to eat, those attending the wedding would all wash their hands by scooping water from out of these large stone containers and washing and ritually cleaning their hands. Jesus tells these servants to fill these containers, which they did to the brim. And it is no accident that John specifically mentions the size of these jars as being 20 to 30 gallons each, which would have equated in our day to close to 1,000 bottles of wine. This is far more than would have been needed to tide the guests over for the remaining period of the wedding celebration. It's excessive. It's extravagant. Jesus then tells the servants to draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet, who is the one that coordinates the wedding on behalf of the host family. Now, if you don't know much about wine, which I don't, the general rule of thumb is that the older the wine, the better. Wine is made every year and stored in containers to age. New wine is literally grape juice because it hasn't yet had any time to ferment. And once it does start to ferment, it takes several years before it's drinkable. But the general rule of thumb is that the older the wine, the better. So in Jewish weddings of the first century, the host would serve the oldest wine first because people were still sober and their palates would be sensitive enough to recognize the quality of what was being served. But then as the more aged wine begins to run out, and hopefully people are getting a little bit more tipsy and less capable of distinguishing the quality of the wine, then you would start serving the newer, cheaper wine. Or, as I read in several biblical commentaries, it was often the practice that the wine at that point would be watered down in order to increase the supply. The master of the banquet tastes the wine and is amazed at its quality. He then pulls the bridegroom to the side and tells him how unexpected this is. That the bridegroom would save the absolute best wine for last. Now, no one, except for the servants and those closest to Jesus, even knew what had happened. It was a miracle, but only a select few individuals knew about it. But why the unnecessarily extravagant amount of wine? Because Jesus isn't like me. His insecurity doesn't drive him to overestimate the amount of wine that's necessary. The extravagance and the exceptional quality of the wine is intentional. And the key to understanding this is found in the closing words of John from this passage, where he doesn't call this a miracle, he calls it a sign. And the nature of a sign is that it points us to something beyond itself. Sort of like how road signs alert us to something that lies ahead of us. The sign of Jesus changing the water into wine at the wedding at Cana points us to something that's far more valuable than the wine itself, as fine as that wine might have been. You see, John uses the word grace 4 times in the opening chapter of his gospel, using it twice in just verse 14, where he says that from out of Christ's fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. And in the context in which John was writing, grace is not a simple concept to explain or understand. And I would say that's still true even today. And the grace and the life that we have in Jesus, that John is wanting to communicate, is so much bigger, so much more vast and abundant than his readers had ever experienced, that rather than trying to define it, John will spend the rest of his gospel describing it. Here's what it looks like. Here's what it tastes like, smells like, sounds like, feels like. Grace is not just about the forgiveness of our sins. Historical Christianity has made the mistake of placing so much emphasis on this aspect of grace that many of us have grown up thinking that grace is all about God forgiving us for all of our misdeeds, kind of like some big giant whiteout that comes down and covers all of the dark areas of our lives. It is that, but it's so much more than that. It is the Zoe life, as John would call it, the abundant life that John wants his readers to see is available in Christ. So he provides signs, 7 of them throughout his gospel. And in this case, grace is described in the context of a wedding ceremony. It's like when you reach the point in a wedding ceremony where you fully expect the cheap stuff, but you're given the best wine that you've ever tasted. And not just the best wine, but an abundance of it. An extraordinary, extravagant amount of it. More than you could possibly imagine abundance. Because again, grace is more than just about the forgiveness of sins. And the abundant life is more than just existence or survival, and even more than the abundance of material things. It's about being connected to the very source of life, of true life, that is rich and full and eternal. Jesus' extravagant miracle of changing the water into wine is a sign that in him the fullness of grace and life and joy and salvation has arrived. It's on the horizon like the first light penetrating the darkness. Of course, we know that this abundant life does not mean a life of ease or comfort and luxury, or even an absence of sorrow and suffering. And it obviously didn't mean that for John's readers either. It was a sign of what lies ahead. And it is still that for us as well. Because maybe for you, the words of Mary to Jesus resonate more with your heart at this time in your life. They have no wine, Mary said to Jesus. It's a message of need, of having a deficiency of resources, a feeling of lacking something that's necessary and vital. And we have all experienced this place of need in different ways, expressed in different ways. They have no food. There's not enough money. I have no friends. There is no cure. I have no more strength. We've all experienced different iterations and degrees of these types of feelings and more, and probably even more so during these past couple of years. What this story communicates is not that the abundant life is going to end our earthly struggles, but that in Jesus, the kingdom of God has arrived like the dawn of the sun on the horizon. And the kernel of faith that lives in us now and that connects us to this eternal life and grace is something that neither sorrow, nor suffering, nor even death itself can destroy. What will it be like? John says it's like being at a wedding. This full-on celebration where the entire village is invited. And at the end, when you think that the best has already come, you find out to your surprise and utter amazement that the very best has been saved for last. And not just the very best, but an abundance of it that will never end. That's what it's like, John would say. And that's the hope that we also carry with us. Let's pray together. Lord, it's such a curious way to begin your ministry. We have to really enter into the heart of John and what he was trying to convey to the people he was writing to, of just how much you brought to his life, how much life and light and goodness and grace. It's not something you can really define. It's something you can only describe. Maybe something you can only illustrate. And so he provided us with the signs that you gave, Lord, to help us to understand what grace means. So I pray that we will take heart from this story at Cana, Lord, from your first miracle that demonstrates the extravagant nature of grace, Lord, and how it comes at the end when we're least expecting it, and how abundant it will be. And that this is the hope, Lord, that we carry with us, even in the midst of our difficult, maybe trying times that we live in. So we thank you, Father, for this word. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.